You're listening to the Move IQ podcast, and I'm your host, Phil Spencer, and I'm delighted to be joined again in Season 2 by my friend and co-host, Chris Ducker. This is the place where I'll be sharing my advice, my experience, and lots of tips and tricks on all things property and moving home generally. In this season, we're going to be talking about renting and giving you advice on how to navigate the rental market. So I'm really pleased to be here and I appreciate your time. So without further ado, let's get cracking. Your rented property is more than just the place you live, it's your home. Taking out Legal & General's rental protection plan could help you pay the rent on your home when you can't. Visit legalandgeneral.com/rental protection plan to find out more. Hello again, everybody. It's us, Chris Ducker and Phil Spencer on the Move IQ Property Podcast. And this series we've been having a deep dive into rentals and all the things that you as a tenant or a prospective tenant should be thinking about. And this time we're going to be talking about how to be a good tenant. Chris, are you a good tenant? Were you a good tenant?
I think I was a marvellous tenant, actually, on several occasions.
How did I know you were going to say that?
Well, actually, I've only had, back in the day, I had two landlords. The first one did not get on well with. Okay. Didn't look after me from a tenant's perspective. And so that relationship was a very quick one. It was over and done with on the year.
And you dealt with the landlord rather than with an agent?
I did, directly,
okay.
Exactly.
And
second time
work,
around, actually, funnily enough, was through an agency. Mm-hmm. But I also got to know the landlord very well. And got to know him so well, actually, that he spent many an evening at our property enjoying blues records, because he was also a fan of the blues, as am I. So that was...
Well, see, that worked really well. And I've heard several stories similar to that, where people have struck up a relationship with the landlord, they've got on well, there's a degree of trust and understanding, and indeed responsibility to one another, and the landlord lets them stay, he doesn't crank the rent up, because they want a nice tenant in their property.
That was the big thing. We stayed at that place 3 years, and not once was the rent increased. Not once.
And if you needed a plumber or, something happened, did they deal with it?
Always.
Because they liked you and you were a good tenant.
It's all down to the blues.
Well, it works both ways. It works both ways. But I think communication is absolutely key with either the landlord or with the agent. You've got to communicate with them. You are living in somebody else's property. You might be paying for it, yes, but it's a two-way street. That is somebody else's property. You want to make it feel like your home, and you have a right to do that. But still, you've got to take care of it. You've got to keep it clean. And in terms of the communication, it's vital that you report any big issues. You don't want to be ringing them up because the light bulb's blown or something like that. But actually, if there was a leak or if there was a tile slipped on the roof, then you need to let them know.
Now, what if you want to do some home improvements yourself? Let's say you want to paint a wall, or you want to, I don't know, rip out an old kitchen cabinets that's seen better days, and you've got one that you want to install yourself. Where do you stand with that? What do you need to do in that situation?
Well, that is one of the I guess cons about renting somebody else's property is it is harder to make it feel like your own.
Yes.
And the standard terms of a lease would preclude you from painting it and ripping out a kitchen cabinet.
Right.
However, if it's important to your decision whether or not to rent that property, then it's a conversation worth having. Would you mind if I painted it, or would you paint it? And certainly I've helped tenants out in the past as a landlord. I've bought the paint and they painted the wall.
Right.
So again, they're happy, I'm happy. Hasn't actually cost me too much more, and I get a happy tenant. So it's a two-way street. Ask the question. If you want to change something, ask the question. Don't just plough ahead without permission, because that could come back to bite you.
And obviously, I mean, I would say you've got the right to, enjoy the property that you're living in, to make the property your home. Yeah. But obviously you want to do that without breaking any of the terms, any of the rules, right? Yeah. Are there certain things, other than just simple things like don't paint the walls without permission sort of thing, are there certain things, Phil, that we need to be on the lookout when it comes to that side of things?
I mean, if you move any of the landlord's possessions, say you don't like the sofa, and you've got your own, and you can't persuade the landlord to take the existing sofa away, then you're going to need to store it well, and you're going to need to make sure that it's returned nice and safe and sound when you leave the property. If, for instance, you want to put up a satellite TV dish. Actually, we don't really have those anymore, do we? That's a thing of the past.
If we were recording in 2010,
Yes.
No, but I mean, I think not actually. That being said, I think that this is actually a very important thing. I mean, things like utilities, like the internet, for example.
Yeah.
Let's say there's just a regular BT line in there, right? Anybody knows.
Other firms are available.
Right, exactly, right? There's a regular line in there. You want something faster, right? You want a faster connection.
Yeah.
You know that there is a faster broadband connection available in that postcoded area. You've already talked with a company. What happens now? They've got to come in. They've got to knock some cables along the skirting boards to get it to where you want it to live inside the property, right? I mean, do we need to call Mr. Landlord up at this point?
I think it's always going to be safer to call Mr. Landlord up and just get that permission. If it benefits the property, which improved broadband speed would benefit the property, then as long as it's not causing damage to the property and it keeps you happy as a tenant, personally, I don't see a particular problem with it. But yes, you would need permission, and you would need to get that permission in writing. Much safer to sort of kind of play by the rules.
Okay, so, I mean, on the odd occasion, the landlord might want to come around to the property, inspect the property, particularly, obviously, if you've only been there for a short period of time. You don't have that relationship built up already, where that trust is maybe a little deeper. What do we have to consider when it comes to that side of things? I mean, they can't just turn up.
No, you as a tenant have a right to live in the property undisturbed and for that property to be well maintained and safe.
Right.
So it needs to have its smoke alarms, its carbon monoxide alarms. It needs to be in good nick. The landlord does have a right to inspect or come round to repair, but he does need to give, or she does need to give the tenant 24 hours notice.
Just 24 hours?
Yes.
Okay.
They can't be coming in every other week.
Right.
To inspect. But they do have a right to inspect at various points during the tenancy.
So they give you a call at, say, I don't know, lunchtime on Thursday, and they're saying, I'm going to be popping around tomorrow night after work.
Yeah.
Will you be in? I want to just walk around real quick. Can you say no?
Yes.
Okay.
You can't keep saying no.
Right. I was going to say, like, you can never step foot in your own property again. Right.
You have to find a mutually convenient time.
Right. So you're not under obligation on the first, on the first time they reach out to you and say, I want to come around and look at. You don't have to feel like you've got to change your plans or anything like that.
No, I wouldn't say so, because you're paying the rent and you have a right to live there peacefully.
Right.
But let's remember, this is a two-way street, and part of the reason for an inspection would enable you to develop a close relationship with the landlord, for you to point out things that perhaps aren't working as well as they might. And the reason why they're coming round, presumably, is because they care about the property and they want it to be in good nick. It's much cheaper for a landlord to prevent, for instance, the roof leaking than it is for the roof to leak and them to pay for fixing it up.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely. I mean, I think the overall kind of defining factor here, and probably the message of this particular episode of the podcast, is that at the end of the day, you are living in someone else's property, and if they want to come around and have a look at it, then you've got to let them do so. It is better for you to give them a heads up. There's something wrong. Don't let it run for too long, and ultimately understand that the best way to be a good tenant is just to be mindful of your decisions with things like possessions. Should you do this? Should you not? If in doubt, don't do it.
Yes,
or give them a call.
Yes, exactly.
Right, exactly. Okay. Yeah. Any final thoughts on this?
Well, it is a two-way street, and the legislation, the rules are designed for it to be fair. And if something is not fair as a tenant, then you have a good right to sort of query that and have it upheld. They are designed to be fair, but you have duties and you have responsibilities. You're paying the rent, but it's their property. Each to their own.
Good stuff. In the next episode, folks, we're going to be deep diving into what you need to do when your tenancy actually comes to an end.
Yeah, it's a really tricky and sort of slightly thorny topic, because sometimes you want it to come to an end and sometimes the landlord might want it to come to an end and you don't. So it's a particularly interesting episode, I hope.
Good stuff. We look forward to seeing you guys then. And remember, if this is the first time that you're discovering the Move IQ Property Podcast, this is season 2. There's a whole bunch of goodness waiting for you over at season 1, where actually we did focus on buying a property as well. So we've got you covered, whether you're buying or renting here at Move IQ. We'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks for listening, folks. That wraps up this episode of Move IQ's Property Podcast. Whatever podcast app you like to use, please do go ahead and hit the subscribe button. I'd also really appreciate it if you could leave us a review. Reviews massively help other people like you to find us. For free supporting materials, head over to our website, moveiq.co.uk. And thanks again for tuning in.